Well, welcome back to my home, Matt.
And to mine.
But today we're going to talk about a little bit of mental toughness.
Yeah.
So why don't you do a little intro and then we'll just go from there.
So many different things have kind of come to front and center. And instead of, can we thrive in this environment? Are we striving to thrive? That's what mental toughness is. And so I want to root this striving for emotional resilience in two concepts that come very, very front and center for mental toughness. We use the words a lot. We use control and we use challenge. So to frame those definitions, control is the capacity to feel and act as if one can exert influence in a situation in question. Concept of challenge is perception of change as an opportunity rather than a threat. Can I grow? Can I develop? Can I change? Do I see that challenge that way? That's what striving is. That I get to a challenge, I view it as an opportunity, not to change me, but to see how I can influence that situation. Back to control. If I'm monitoring those two things, then I mentally I feel like I'm more mentally present in the moment to be able to view that situation, zoom back in. Maybe it's the world, then it becomes my world. Now it becomes Tuesday. Now it becomes Tuesday at 10 o'clock. This is a really challenging situation on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Whereas 5 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, 30 seconds ago, it felt emotionally overwhelming. What do I go through emotionally? What am I experiencing? But we don't use the language today. We use behavior, right? Or we use social media mediums, or we use communication words that we confuse as thoughts. Okay? When I actually have a feeling, people go, I'm feeling really angry right now, is different than someone who's demonstrating anger. And that's the demonstration of what I'm feeling, which is a behavior, not a feeling. So if I get into and can zoom in even tighter to that emotion and call it what it is, now I'm really thriving. Now I've actually started to break apart the thought from the feeling. So now I'm really able to use the mental strength, really able to use the mental toughness and demonstrate a mental toughness appropriately. So go ahead.
So what you're saying is that if I can stop and identify the feeling in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I moving through that feeling, or am I sitting in that feeling, recognizing feeling, and how can I strive from there? For example, if I'm feeling anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly pull it back and recognize that maybe I don't know why I'm generally agitated or angry right now. So maybe, yes, I'll learn to stop and understand that I feel that anger. And that's at this moment, and maybe recognize what the external force is. But how do I make that switch into something productive? Because, anger's not a very productive emotion. I mean, it's very helpful, it feels sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's not overly productive. So I wouldn't call myself striving when I'm in that state.
We use the 3 R's: recognize, realize, and routinize. So if I'm able to recognize my emotion in that moment, I recognize anger. Anger has this immense power and ability in us to get us to move. And it is such a powerful strength for a lot of us, but we don't use it the right way. Okay, so when we think about sport context, or we think about the situation or community context, whether it's a ref makes a bad call, it can be a community context like we were talking earlier about road rage. I'm feeling wronged or unfair. Something is unfair. I'm feeling wronged. I'm feeling unheard. Whatever that is in the moment is even one step closer. It's just I'm feeling angry. Okay? I have anger right now. Now, it depends on what direction it goes at that point in time. But even as you were talking, you alluded to the fact that it starts to do something to our thinking. It starts to take our thinking down a path, or take our doing down a path that maybe we don't necessarily want. And so when we respond or react to anger, we don't actually get to that realize, that second step. We might recognize it's anger, but then I don't realize what the intention of it is for. What is its purpose? Can I repurpose anger by understanding anger is as it is, but it doesn't have to tell me the story. It doesn't have to tell me what I think. I can think something different in that moment. That's where we're getting back to control and challenge. What's the challenge in this moment? That I need to race up beside somebody in a vehicle and let them know that they wronged me in some way, or I don't think I've ever seen the ref change their mind, but yet everybody feels validated to scream and holler and wail and go after the refs, even to their teammates, or take their anger out on their opponent, or what is that really the story? Am I identifying something I control? At that moment in time, I'm putting my emotional energy into something I don't. And that doesn't usually result in the most positive behavior or in change.
So how can somebody, what's the mental toughness piece with anger? Like, what is the proper process? So obviously I'm not going to affect change if I lash out at something that I don't have any influence on.
Mm-hmm.
I only have an influence on the way I behave. And so how do I switch that to something positive versus lashing out or staying like a bee, which is that initial reaction?
So, it's amazing to think of, I'm going to use a sport example for a second,
Mm-hmm.
because I think one of the better sport examples of the utilization of that energy is boxing, right? So boxing is, as much as people look at it and go, man, that's just two people throwing gloves at each other. It's exceptionally tactical.
Mm-hmm.
You're constantly aware. And if all of a sudden the emotion takes over, that's where most people think that they'd be good at boxing. That's
Right.
the adage of everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face.
Right.
And in boxing, you watch somebody regulate an emotion or direct an emotion. So they're better able to recognize what's happened. They're better able to realize the intention for it and then repurpose it
Right.
into a strategy or tactic. They have to still be thinking. Very, very cerebral sport,
Yeah.
much, maybe
Very
not,
interesting.
people aren't aware of that,
Yeah.
but that is such a great example of how that sport and those athletes are different from, you see somebody direct anger in the parking lot at a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So the third step when you think of routinizing something is, as somebody gets better at that, they just go through the 3 steps quicker. Do I recognize? Do I realize? Do I routinize? Recognize, realize, routinize. Pretty soon I don't necessarily have to do a lot of work in the recognize. I've
Right.
just become better at repurposing the energy that comes from emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you see mental toughness demonstrated more internalized. It's more internalized. It's less sort of thought, like control what you can. That's
Right.
oftentimes people, they intellectualize that goal. They want that,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't demonstrate it,
Right.
right? We haven't internalized. They haven't made it ours yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we were talking earlier about the NFL draft and
Mm.
how they switched and they're in people's homes and they did it via Zoom, and there's a lot of pushback on social media. And it was a lot of interesting behavior comes out of that, and a lot of interesting feelings are shown from people reacting openly on social media, whether it's their frustration that it's not, that it's a different format, that it's online and it's not, how it's always been done, or the vulnerability of the coaches and the athletes and having cameras or opening up their homes, and
Mm-hmm.
also the aspect of having more FaceTime with more people. So realizing the whole like spectrum of emotions that's happening, and it's just a little bit out of control or a little bit less controlled than it normally is.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's lots
It
of good stuff.
it really did present to this. I felt, okay, so
Yeah.
this is
Yeah,
mine,
for
but
sure. Yeah, yeah.
it presented to the sport world something that we don't always get to see. We get to see a very, and I don't use the term negatively, a contrived, designed process when it came to the NFL, something like the NFL draft. And I mean, those of us involved in sport know that sport is entertainment. So
Mm-hmm. It's a
it's very well
product.
done that way, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you saw the NFL draft put together this way, people were in their homes. They were, sitting in their living rooms. They were sitting at their kitchen tables. We talked about how they compared the coaches' homes. Um, they blew up about the differences in the coaches' homes. And Bill Belichick had his dog in the chair making the draft. I think he was in the fourth round pick, and everybody sort of panicked because Bill Belichick wasn't at his computer and his dog was. And so there was a big blow up on social media about how his dog's doing the draft now. And like, it was a very human way of seeing something. With that said, I loved your word, you vulnerability, right? Everybody can see your home. Everybody,
Mhm.
your family's sitting there. Nobody's not everybody's dressed up in $9,000 suits, and who did you wear and how does this look?
Yeah.
People are in khaki shorts and a golf shirt, hanging out with their brother and their sister. The coaches have all their kids behind them, and the emotion, the visceral sort of feeling of the emotion in the moment was, I felt so much more genuine from the individual being chosen,
Right.
and even
So
from the coaches, because they
yeah.
didn't have everybody else around them. They were just talking for themselves or
So
their four kids.
was it an emotional roller coaster? Like, because from a person that feels empathy, right? You're like, all of a sudden you're feeling that stress, or you see, you're feeling a bit more anxiety, or maybe you're like more joyous than you normally would be because maybe you've got a little piece of their personality. Because we're all looking at each other and making assumptions about what
Mm-hmm.
type of people you are by what they're seeing in your background, by how you're dressed, right? No different than when it's a controlled product, but it's not such a controlled environment when all of a sudden you're in people's homes and true lives. So there's maybe more of a connection when you're watching something like that with the
Mm-hmm.
athletes and the coaches. Okay,
Very much
like
so.
you
Yep.
really like somebody or you really dislike somebody, right? And they try to create that with the product, but
Yeah.
I don't think that it would be the same as, once everybody's in their own space, right? And
Yeah.
everybody runs their lives differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, there's some of the people had food all over the place. Other people didn't. Like, I remember, I can't remember the player. I was trying to remember the players. We were talking this morning, but uh, he was sitting with what I seemed like his girlfriend or his wife at the time, but she was on. He was being talked about as a draft pick, and she was on her phone scrolling through a bunch of stuff, and he grabbed her phone and took it and put it beside her. Like, you could tell, like, things are getting like real. That's not gonna. You're not getting that shot at the draft because she's not sitting in the green room with them, right? Like,
Right.
but she's hanging out. She's living her life, and he's like, "What are you doing?
This is
Don't
the
do that,"
biggest
because that
moment
had
of
so.
my life. Yeah.
And you're scrolling through
Instagram
Facebook, like.
can wait. Yeah.
So, those kinds of things, as well as like a player, multiple players, the commentators, they try to build the drama, like, right here, here's the best, and these two guys are looking to go this team, and here's their needs, and all this kind of stuff. And then the team would come on and they draft someone completely different. This is literally what happened for so many of us at school when the teacher would line us all up and they go, "You two are captains, now pick teams." So you
Right.
get you get that sense of like, okay, now we're getting down to the last few players, and
Yeah.
okay, well, I guess we'll take you. But except that sometimes that player didn't even get chosen. Like, they didn't even get drafted. Like, they
Yeah.
thought, well, he's the fifth best corner in the draft, and oh, they went with that player. But they'd had a camera on this guy for the past 2 minutes,
Oh my
and
God.
now he's not, and now he's not, and now he's not, and now he's
What?
not, and you could see him start to build, right?
Oh, and so what does that mean for that? So do you think that it's more of a visceral reaction or more of a rejection in this format for those poor athletes? Because obviously no matter what, your family, you don't want to disappoint your family. You get wrapped up in all that as a
Mm-hmm.
sport star, right?
Yeah.
But now
Yep.
all of a sudden, they're talking and you've invited them into your home. And there's a different level, there's a different, layer to that person once you've invited them. So does it create more
Mm-hmm.
pressure and more feeling of rejection in the end?
Oh yeah, I
Man,
felt like it. Yeah, and you got a
yeah.
real sense of human. Like, these athletes are human, and you hear
Yeah.
so often like these athletes, 20, 21 years of age, playing in front of 100,000 people at Michigan or Notre
Mm-hmm.
Dame, and then everybody's criticizing because they got a drop. Like, okay, so that player is 20 years old or 21 years old. They dropped the ball 9 times in 1 year. Yeah, well, he's had a drop problem 9 times. I could take a football to the mall And I probably wouldn't find 10 people who catch the ball 9 times, let alone
Right.
have 9 drops if I threw it at them 100.
Yeah, yeah.
So yet these players from a performance perspective are expected to be way up here and still control things, still be mentally tough all the time.
Yeah.
And now we get to see them in their golf shirt and khakis hanging out. Jake Fromm was probably a great example. He was I think he was the quarterback for Georgia. He was projected to be, he's a very, very good quarterback, very successful, but he wasn't getting picked. And you could just see him like just starting to build and build and build, but he's
No,
got to control himself. He's got to control his behavior. But he's human.
totally.
He's a
And
human, and he's going through it with his brother and his dad in the
yeah,
room. Like
eh,
it's the first time these guys aren't the best at what they do, and they
yeah.
can't feel helpless to do anything about
Yeah, and you know what?
it.
There's
Yeah.
that performance thing. So I am able to control and perform better. Let's say if I'm sitting in a group of like a business networking group or a sport in public, but behind the computer in your own home, sitting at your table and still having to manage that same level of, you know, mental toughness and control is totally different because there's an actual sense, I believe, with the computers of a separation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yep.
you know, whether people realize it or not, we do more things, I think, freely because there's that separation. People aren't surrounding us in all directions, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't always feel real. So you feel a sense of like secrecy, but people are still watching and seeing that.
It really is a demonstration of emotional resilience. First time in their lives, they're not the first person picked,
Yeah,
right? They're the best
totally.
of the best, cream of the crop, and agents and NFL told them they're going to be a mid-third round pick, and so we're going to bring all this stuff in, and we're going to set you up. We want to make sure bandwidth, want to be there with you, bring in whoever you want, and then they
Mhm.
don't get picked,
Yeah.
and then they don't get picked. And now the fifth round's going on day 3, and they don't get picked, right? Their minds are spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and we get to see them in their home, in their environment, the safest place, supposedly, the safest place that they can be in their world, and we're all watching them.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Mhm.
like when you think about those two mental toughness traits, challenge, this is a threat to me. A person's just saying, okay, now, like a guy like Tom Brady got drafted in the 6th round, he phoned them, the Pat said, this is the best draft you've ever made. Like he turned a real challenging situation into an opportunity, then took advantage of the next opportunity as it was presented to him, and he never looked back. But this is a guy who's always done that. He's
Right.
always looked at those situations as opportunities. He did it to my Falcons in the Super Bowl. It really bothered me. But not everybody's wired that way. And you can wire that though.
Yeah.
You can start at 14 and start to wire these mental toughness traits through, can I recognize my emotions? Can I realize what the purpose is? And can I routinize that into my responses as they are almost things that behaviors and demonstrable behaviors that I can control? What better time to be working on that than no competitive pressure,
Yeah.
circumstances beyond your control,
Mhm.
and really honing in, zooming in on, yeah, I might be frustrated or angry, but that doesn't mean that I have to stop doing what I'm doing. And mental toughness, that's one of the core components or traits of mental toughness, is executing the ability to feel and act as if I could exert an influence in this situation.
Right.
Feel and
That's
act.
the cue is you feel like you have an influence in that situation.
Yeah, like I can
Yeah.
influence it. Sometimes the influence in that situation isn't positive,
Right.
so you didn't really demonstrate control.
Right.
Right? You
Hmm.
can demonstrate control by inhibiting something. You can demonstrate control by seeing an opportunity in a moment, behaving in a different way. But ultimately, I think that when you zoom in on that emotional part, that's why resilience is such a strong concept. Is emotional resilience is the ability to continue to mine away at this skill,
Regardless. Yeah.
right? Because
Hmm.
we can't predict what we'll be emotional about.
Hmm.
How can I repurpose this? How
Yeah.
can I go to the next step rather than just go and react
Yeah.
and drive thought or behavior with
So I mean, we could. I know, like as far as this topic goes, I know that as this goes on longer, you know, it's just more and more relevant. It's always relevant, and it always has been, even before
Yeah.
COVID-19. I'm talking about mental toughness and mental health.
Yep.
But I
Yep.
think that there's a real role right now for us to like have those readily available conversations, and you know,
Hmm.
the real talks and access. That's a great wrap up. I think that's definitely something that I feel personally that I could really get behind, and I think that that's what we're trying to do for these types
Hmm.
of things is relatable things that people can get behind. So thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
I really
Awesome.
enjoy our conversations, and
Me
we'll be
too.
following up with you, and we'll talk to you soon, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Karna.
You
Take care.
betcha. You too. Bye.
Bye.